What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to my Indiana Jones reviews leading up to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny later this month. Last week we talked about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and this week I'm going to be talking about the second and probably the most unique film in the franchise, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was released 3 years after Raiders of the Lost Ark. Everyone had experienced the boom that was Indiana Jones, that was Raiders of the Lost Ark, and now Steven Spielberg was doing something different that he hadn't done before. Steven Spielberg had never made a sequel to any of his movies before, and part of the deal when George Lucas pitched him this idea of Indiana Jones was that it was originally a trilogy. He had to do 2 more movies after Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it's always interesting to see what a director would do with a sequel, if said director would ever do a sequel. And something that I really love about Temple of Doom is that even though it follows a similar formula beat that Raiders of the Lost Ark did, all the Indiana Jones movies, they follow a basic formula. Most movies and franchises follow a basic formula. So even though Temple of Doom follows a similar formula that Raiders did, this is a completely different movie than Raiders. This movie is much darker than the first one, a piece of advice that Steven Spielberg took from George Lucas when he was filming The Empire Strikes Back, was that the middle chapter of a trilogy is always the darkest chapter. And Steven Spielberg definitely took huge advantage of that advice, because this is easily the darkest, the most violent, the most brutal Indiana Jones movie, so much so that it is very well known among Indiana Jones fans that this movie almost got an R rating. It's rated PG because they talked the MPA into giving it a PG rating, but it's because of this movie that we actually have the PG-13 rating. This is nothing new. If you know anything about the Indiana Jones movies or about films in general, this is pretty common knowledge, but there are people out there that don't know that. It's because of this movie, Temple of Doom, that we do have the PG-13 rating. Steven Spielberg actually suggested that because movies were getting to be a little more extreme, too extreme for PG, but not quite that R rating yet, and thus we got a PG-13 rating. And even though Temple of Doom is my least favorite of the original Indiana Jones trilogy, I love the fact that this movie went in a darker direction. I like the fact that it took different risks. For instance, Nazis aren't the villains in these movies. This Kali cult, which I'll talk about a little bit more later in the movie, are the villains of this movie. There's much more darker imagery in the movie. It's actually borderline gothic imagery, and it's something that you wouldn't expect from an Indiana Jones movie, but I really appreciate the fact that they went in this direction, even though Steven Spielberg has come out and said that he doesn't like this film, and his best experience with making the film was that the fact that he ended up marrying the leading girl that's in this movie, Kate Capshaw, and he's still married to her. And something that people actually forget about is that this movie didn't do that well when it came out. Sure, it made money, and it eventually led to the third film, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but critically, this movie did not do very well. In fact, Steven Spielberg actually said that the reviews were pretty terrible when this film came out. And it's actually weird to think about that now, because Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom has kind of developed, I don't want to say cult following, because it has become a classic when it comes to people who appreciate film like I do. I mean, there's still people that don't like this film, but if you ask anyone what they think of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, a lot of people say that they really do like this movie now. But with that being said, Temple of Doom is not a perfect movie. It's not on the same level as Raiders of the Lost Ark, in my opinion. For instance, one of my biggest problems with the movie is that the MacGuffin that Indy is going after in this movie, they're called the Shankara Stones. I believe that's how you pronounce them. After a really great and fast-paced opening from a nightclub, to our characters getting on a plane, to them having to leave the plane because the pilots of the plane were in cahoots with the bad guys, they dumped all the fuel and they jumped out of the plane, so now Indy and our characters have to get off the plane. They eventually get into this village in India. And once Indy and our characters get to this village in India, we learn that life is completely gone from this village. The children have been kidnapped from this village, and they stole what was this Shankara stone that caused all the life to basically disappear from this village. It's much more supernatural than the Ark of the Covenant was. At least you could argue it's much more supernatural than the Ark of the Covenant was. And that's something that the Indiana Jones movies have done. They've taken things that are real or could be real and kind of plays around with them to give them a more unique supernatural approach to it. This film definitely leans more into the supernatural approach when it comes to the MacGuffin of the film. In fact, I'm not really sure if the stones in this movie are based on something real or something that actually is real. I'm not well adversed in stuff like that, but if I had to take a guess, I would say they're based on something, but played around with a lot more to make them seem more supernatural. At least that's my guess of it. That being said, though, the stones aren't really that interesting. In fact, halfway through the temple in this movie, you tend to forget about the stones. At least I tend to forget about the stones. With Raiders of the Lost Ark, you're always concerned about who has the Ark, where is it going, is Indy going to get it back? Here, you tend to forget about the stones, which is, you could argue, is not a good thing. I mean, if you don't care about what Indy's after, then why would you care about him going on this mission? Well, the film makes up for that because when Indy goes through this temple, he realizes that the children that were stolen from this village, they're actually being slaved to find the other Shankara stones. I think they said there were 5 in the movie, and they now have 3. So they're using the children as slaves to find the other Shankara stones. So even though the stones aren't really important themselves, we do get a much more greater stakes with seeing these children being enslaved. The stones are just kind of there to kind of hold everything together. So when at the end of the movie, you're like, oh yeah, that's why we were going on this mission, to get these stones. Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory. But I would say like 90% of the movie takes place in this big palace in India where the village believed that they took the stone and they took the kids. And then we find out that underneath this palace is this Kali cult, which we learn about a little bit more in the famous dinner sequence. We all know the famous dinner sequence. They're eating snakes and bugs and monkey brains for dessert. Yeah, you could call that racist nowadays, but the fact that the Indian people back then were okay with it because they know they were just joking around and playing around with rumors or stuff like that went around, I don't really look too much into it. I just see it as an entertaining sequence. But we do learn more about this Kali cult that would sacrifice people to their god Kali. And then we find out later, a little bit later after the dinner sequence, Indy and our 2 characters, Willie Scott, the main girl, and Short Round, who, we all know who Short Round is, they find the temple underneath the palace where we see that this cult is still active. And really quick, let me talk about Willie Scott and Short Round because I didn't really mention them all that much. I love Short Round. I know a lot of people are annoyed with Short Round. I don't care. I've always loved Short Round. I've always thought he was entertaining. And yeah, he can be a little bit annoying. I can see why some people are annoyed with him, but, at least he helps Indiana Jones. He's not someone that's just a damsel in distress and screaming and complains about her clothing and her voice and her nails and stuff like that, like Willie Scott does. I've heard some people that just really hate Willie Scott. I don't hate her, but I can understand how she's not one of your favorite characters. She is a little annoying. She does scream a lot so much. But, I kind of look at it as that's how the character is written, and Kate Capshaw, she does play it very well, even though she didn't like the fact that she had to play that type of character. I was much more annoyed with her when I was first getting into these movies back when I was like 12 or 13. She has grown on me a little bit more, and I don't hate her, but I can understand how she's not your favorite. But Short Round, I don't care what anyone says. I don't find him annoying. I find him very entertaining and very funny at times too. And yes, as a side note, I teared up when I saw the actor who played Short Round won Best Actor at the Oscars from Everything Everywhere All at Once. And when he hugged Harrison Ford, man, I just teared up. I mean, it's Short Round and Indy back on stage. It was a beautiful moment. But anyway, back to the temple. So anyway, the Temple of Doom in this movie, I mean, it is absolutely gorgeous. I love all the sets in this temple. The set pieces, honestly, I don't really hear get talked about all this much because look at this. Look at this imagery. Nowadays, this would all be CGI. It would just be a green screen. In fact, if George Lucas directed this movie nowadays, everything would just be a green screen. But like I said, the sets in this movie don't get talked about enough, in my opinion. They did a damn good job making this place look visually stunning and beautiful, but also horrible. Like, you do not want to be in this place at all. You do not want to be prisoned in here, or you don't want to be a cult member at all in here. In fact, I actually made a joke, I think last year. Wouldn't it be a cool idea if they took this set and kind of made like in a theme park ride, so to speak, where you get attached to the cage and you get lowered into the pit, but instead of lava, it's like water or something like that. I don't know. It's a side note, but if they do something like that, that would be awesome. But yes, I can't talk about the temple parts in this movie without mentioning the very shocking sacrificing scene. I mean, the sacrificing scene in this film could be considered a little tame nowadays, now that we've seen a lot more graphic horror stuff. But I'm sorry, for an Indiana Jones movie, this sacrificing scene is pretty brutal and pretty hardcore. First off, this guy that they're sacrificing to their god Kali, he's being chained to this metal cage. He then gets his heart ripped out. And if that's not enough, he gets lowered into a pit of molten lava. While his heart is still beating, his heart then catches on fire. This guy catches on fire the lower he gets into the pit, and then gets dropped into this molten lava. I mean, whew. It's pretty entertaining to watch, but man, it is brutal for an Indiana Jones movie. And then, of course, our three main characters get captured. Willie gets captured to be a sacrifice. Short Round gets captured to be a slave with the rest of the kids. And then Indy gets captured to be transformed into an evil cult member, which is a really, really cool and really brutal scene. First off, he's forced to drink blood, which rightfully so he spits out. Then after he spits it out, they reveal they have a voodoo doll of him, which they burn in fire to get him to cooperate. Then they whip him with his own whip, as well as whipping Short Round. Then he gets forced to drink the blood entirely, which then leads to this really creepy scene with candles all around him, and he's like twitching and screaming, and then he slowly turns into evil Indiana Jones. It's, again, visually stunning and entertaining to watch, but very, very dark and brutal for Indiana Jones. But of course, classic Indiana Jones fashion, he snaps out of it. Short Round finds out that burning him would actually snap him out of that trance. He saves Willie, and then Indy, Willie, and Short Round try to save all the kids from these evil cult members. We of course get a classic Indiana Jones trope where he has to fight a very big, muscular guy, which actually the guy in this scene is actually the same guy who played the big Nazi guy in Raiders of the Lost Ark in that great plane scene. So I think it's pretty cool that they brought him back to be the big muscle guy again, which then eventually leads to a great mine chase. I mean, this scene is so fast-paced and so entertaining. This actually was supposed to be a scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. They ended up cutting it because of, I guess, timing, or they couldn't afford to do it or something like that. But they reworked it into this script for Temple of Doom, and it's such an entertaining sequence. And again, visually stunning. I mean, just look at these shots. It's so impressive that they pulled all this off. I mean, some of it is obviously miniature, and some of it's in real, they're actually in the carts. But the fact that they pulled this off and it looks so seamless for the most part, it's very entertaining. They then get out of the temple and make it to the bridge scene, and this whole bridge scene, again, is very entertaining and very fast-paced. This whole movie is fast-paced. Once we get to the palace, it's just non-stop action. It's almost like, I've heard some people mention this, it almost feels like this movie has two acts. The first act, which is the nightclub going all the way into the village, and then the palace / the temple scene all the way to the very end. It's so fast-paced. But this bridge scene, I freaking love the ending of this movie because I am terrified of heights. And looking at this bridge, no. I am there with Steven Spielberg. Apparently Steven Spielberg would not cross that bridge because he's scared of heights too. I am right there with you, Steven Spielberg. You couldn't pay me to walk across this bridge. I don't care if you tell me that this is the safest bridge in the world. No way in hell I'm doing that. But Indy is eventually trapped. There's bad guys on both ends, so he decides to cut the bridge in half. And it's just nuts. It is nuts. And I love the fact that they pulled this off on real location with a real bridge, and obviously dummies are falling from it, but they actually went to a soundstage and filmed like an actual bridge, like an actual falling bridge that it's a set, it's not outdoors or anything like that. But again, this is something that you would normally do CGI stuff with, and I love the fact that they did this practically. Indy of course beats the bad guy Mola Ram, which I haven't really talked about Mola Ram in this movie that much. He's not one of the most memorable Indiana Jones villains, but he is one of the more entertaining Indiana Jones villains. He's just on the right level of over the top, yet just at the right level of really messed up, really dark and serious villain. And he's a very entertaining villain. And of course, classic Indiana Jones fashion, the villain dies by his own greed. He tries to save one of the stones that's glowing hot because Indy is quoting something. I actually don't know exactly what he's quoting, but it causes the rocks to light on fire, which then Molaram tries to catch one of them, but of course it burns out of his hand. He loses his grip from the bridge, falls to his death in the giant lake of alligators. You know, all the Indiana Jones villains, they die from their own greed, from what they're after, and it's kind of poetic in a sense. Indy, Willie, and Short Round make it back to the village. Life has returned from the village. All the kids are rescued and brought back, and we end on a much more happier note than we did with Raiders of the Lost Ark. So yeah, that was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Like I said, I really appreciate that they went in a much more different direction than they did with Raiders. It's not as fun, light-spirited as Raiders does with just a hint of violence. This movie just goes full-on darkness, full-on violence. Does have its lighthearted and funny moments too, but nowhere near as much as the first film, and definitely nowhere near as much as the third film. And yeah, like I said, the Shankara stones, they're not really all that interesting. You kind of forget about them halfway through the movie. Willie is a little annoying. She's not one of the better Indiana Jones characters. There are some dumb moments throughout the movie, and I can understand if the violence and the darkness gets to be a little too much for you. Like I said, it's not up to par with the first film, Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I think it's a very unique sequel. I really, really do love Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I'm glad that people have appreciated it a lot more over the years, and it really doesn't deserve the hate that it got when it first came out. It's a very unique sequel, and it's one that I always enjoy watching. If you haven't watched it in a couple years and you used to not like it, give it another chance. It honestly holds up for the most part very well. Like I said, it's not as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it's still a very good, very unique sequel on its own, and that's another thing. It stands on its own. You don't really have to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark to watch Temple of Doom. In fact, Temple of Doom takes place a couple of years before Raiders, which is an interesting choice. My point is, this film does a really good job standing on its own. You don't have to see the first film to watch this film. You can honestly jump right into this film if you haven't seen any of the Indiana Jones movies yet. Although I would recommend watching them in order. It is better to watch it that way. Like I said, not as good as Raiders, but this film definitely deserves a Blu-ray purchase. It's a very entertaining sequel, very unique sequel. It stands on its own. And yeah, like I said, I'm really glad that over the decades since it's been out, people have appreciated it a lot more because I've always enjoyed this film. So yeah, that's my review for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So guys, that's my review, and just like always, let me know what you think about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in the comment section. Do you love the movie? Did you used to hate the movie, but now you've grown to like it? Or have you always not liked the movie? Whatever your thoughts on everything is, let me know in the comment section below. And just like always, guys, thank you again so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Next week, I'm going to be talking about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, so look forward to that. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like and share it. Subscribe right here if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, take care.